standpoint of, growth centers is not necessarily what sells, or always,
Right.
what people want. I mean, they want to live out in the country, but you don't want everyone driving and using all the energy to drive into town. And I think we need to, be realistic and try to address how do you deal with that type of thing. But at the same time, I agree with you in places, the two main growth centers or growth areas need to allow growth. And we need to deal with.
Well said.
And we need to deal with, what about the fringes beyond that? I mean, what about maybe you don't want to have a lot of development in Marshfield or Cabot, but there should be more development in Berrytown or, East Montpelier. What about the fringe areas outside of the growth centers? The other thing I think in housing that I didn't see mentioned in here discussed, and I wasn't around, in that section I just came in the tail end, is subsidized housing. That obviously affects certain towns more than others, but there's huge federal cuts coming down on Section 8, and there's only so much, I realize as a region, there's only so much control we have over that and things like that. But I know in Berry City, that there's 2-year waits to get on Section 8, to get a Section 8 voucher right now. And they're talking about it getting worse. They're basically cutting it off and saying, they're not even doing a waiting list at Berry Housing Authority. They're saying, forget it. So somewhere along the line, I think subsidized housing and those types of programs needs to be addressed. And where is it, regionally? How are we spread out with subsidized housing? We talk about fair share of lower cost housing. Let's look where the Section 8 vouchers are and see if we're really sharing. And is it realistic to even try? It's nice to say we should all have a fair share and there should be Section 8 housing and, wherever, Mad River or whatever, but it's not necessarily where the people are living that need Section 8 housing. So, anyways.
It's where they're working that they need Section 8.
Well, that's it, yeah, you're right.
Where they're living now, we don't
That's
care
true.
about. It's where they're working.
Well,
That's been the big rub.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense, and how do you address that whole thing?
Well,
Tom? Go ahead.
was the point that I wanted to make, was that everybody touts the idea of ground-up planning. But really, when it comes down to it, at the town level, there's too many parochial interests, and it's very hard to get good, sound, long-range planning for across the board. They might get a lot of planning for something that someone is particularly interested in. But, we hold a lot of the power because they have to come to us for confirmation and to get their plan approved. And we should, write our plan that, so that it requires towns to address these issues and then hold them to it. I mean, my town's no different. There's a lot of things that we didn't do in our last plan, and I would hope that next time it gets submitted, this committee holds them to, to the requirements of the regional plan, so that it does conform to the regional plan.
They're not required to get confirmation, right? Only if they want to get
If they want.
planning grants.
Right.
Right. I mean,
Well, that's
yeah.
the carrot. That's the only carrot,
That's the only carrot.
But I don't think we've used it effectively in the past. We haven't really been willing to be forceful in or maybe we didn't even know what we wanted strongly enough to put a lot of force behind it.
We spent a full meeting just following the adoption of this current plan on that. And we came to one realization is that even if we could affect the town plan, that isn't what is driving some of the decisions that are being made in those towns. It's more related to zoning. And we have no impact on zoning regulations.
Right, but...
Except to suggest that their plan should be what leads their zoning ordinances and
Right,
and
but
changes of that.
But the process is the plan, zoning.
Right.
That's the sequence. So if we can affect the plan.
But the plan
Yeah.
doesn't need to be adopted by a town, or by a vote of the
Town at
town.
large, no.
It just needs to be adopted by the elected leaders.
Right.
But zoning changes is put up for a vote of the whole town. And that's one of the areas where we had quite a bit of discussion on, as I recall.
Well, I still think that, we have to use the tools we have.
That's right.
And if we can only affect the plan, then we have to hold towns accountable when they come to us for town plan approval. And also to have, when staff is working with the towns in preparing their plans, they should be, you know, trying to lead them in that direction. So that, you know, energy, you know, housing, all those issues.
Okay. Larry?
On that subject, didn't that new law that was passed last year, 117 or whatever it was, wasn't part of that law that the town plan and the zoning were supposed to parallel each other, not go in two different directions?
Right. Yes.
So we can affect what they do.
Right.
But not what they've already done. It only says if you
Right.
pass something new, it has to be in
It
conformance,
has
not
to
if
be in
it's,
conformance.
right.
Well, they're gonna come
If it's
before
not
us every
conformance.
5 years, so eventually they're gonna catch up.
Eventually. No,
But I guess,
You're right.
but,
I lived here, the
but
other
does
time,
it,
one was going one way, one was going the other, two different.
but does it work in reverse? In other words, if you do a new zoning ordinance, or new zoning amendment, it has to be in conformance with the town plan. But if you have a new town plan, does it have to be in conformance with your existing zoning?
No.
No, I mean,
It's a visionary document.
You could, yeah, so my point is you could continually, you could leave your zoning alone, keep having this visionary document that doesn't ever.
But you can't get it passed.
As long as you don't make any changes in your zoning, you're okay.
Actually, that's,
Well, no, because eventually the plan would not be approvable, right? I
We need to
mean,
get
Well-
stronger on that and say, okay, we ain't gonna prove it once.
Well, that's the question that came up, I think, before, was if the town plan is completely different than the zoning, should this commission approve it?
well, they
Wasn't
show,
that the discussion before?
Yeah.
they have to show an improvement in their plans each time, right? Or working towards all the elements.
Let's get some
And
clarity.
one of those
Chris, you may know.
approvals should be that their zoning maybe.
Chris will
Should be
try to give us some clarity on
Well,
that
there's,
topic.
there's no technical requirement for our approval process. We're supposed to find that it's in conformance with the 13 planning goals, that it contains the 10 elements, and that it's
Compatible.
compatible with the
Joining.
joining towns and the regional plan. So as it stands right now, there's no technical requirement. I suppose one thing we could do is state in our regional plan that we won't approve plans that have incompatible zoning.
That's a good idea.
And that would give, as it stands right now, there's no legal framework to deny a plan
But when we had that discussion
based on zoning
before that
incompatibility.
117 was passed, that was prior to that bill. And I think we got a little more leverage now we had back then.
I don't know, do we? It doesn't seem, it
Yeah.
seems to me we don't have any more, from what you're saying, we don't have any more leverage than before. Unless, like you said, you change your regional
Well-
plan, and it says that, region,
Well, I think that we may have a little more leverage in that. I think there'd be better justification for us doing something like that now because of the increased emphasis in the Act 115 on conformance between the town plan and the zoning bylaw. And that emphasis is particularly emphasized when dealing with housing issues, so.
Not to digress, but can I ask one question dealing with that? Is, if the commission does not approve a plan as being in conformance, and the town disagrees, is there an appeal mechanism? I mean, let's say you push the limits and you say,
Council of
this
Regional
doesn't, your zoning is so out of whack with your plans, you're talking one thing and doing totally something different, we're not gonna approve it.
Yeah.
And they say, well, you don't have any legal right to do that. What's their,
They would probably be right,
well, I know that, it's not an issue of
They
being
would be
right,
right.
the question is, can they appeal it?
but they still would not have an approved,
No.
regionally approved
Yeah,
plan.
but isn't there an appeal to the
The non-existing body.
Yes.
Non-functioning.
Yeah,
Right, that doesn't exist.
That-
and our representative would have to take it to that body who never meets to grieve and appeal.
Never.
Miss Rhonda, right?
Okay, so,
Never.
this is the Supreme Court, sir.
This is, the buck stops here.
We're doing that automatically. We're setting it up, we're doing our zoning now, after doing the plan, and we're setting it up so that the zoning pretty closely as possible follows the town plan. And, at least on the outset of this, maybe having it written in, maybe even as a suggestion, you know what I mean, to lay the groundwork to get people thinking in that direction.
Well, we will have a lively debate about that, I'm sure, when it comes up. George?
for those who've been on the commission for less than 5 years, we might actually take a second, tell them what the council is.
Council of Regional Commissioners?
Right.
I don't know.
The other thing.
10 years, more like. 10 or 12 years they haven't met.
Time flies when you're having
Yeah.
fun. I think one of the things that stuck out in my mind in the previous discussion about compatibility was, what you do or whether there's meaning to, we need to change our zoning to do this. And 5 years later, we need to change our zoning to do this, which is exactly the same language that was in the plan 5 years ago. And no zoning proposals were brought forth. And we need to change our zoning to do this. At what point do we say, that's a great thought, but it's a thought and it's not an action? And if that isn't, in fact, one of the key elements in making the plan approvable, and there's a history that says this is writing, but it's not action, what do you do with it? Which is kind of intriguing.
Well, I don't think we really can make that connection, because, like you said before, zoning is passed by the people of the town, so there's no way you can require.
But it's initiated by the
voters.
select board, right?
And that, under the Act 115 amendments, zoning is also now passed by the select board unless the town has voted to vote on it, or unless the select board cedes the right back to the voters.
Yeah, select board
So that's
can
a
do it.
pretty
That's
significant
change,
change.
that's a big change.
Yeah, select board
So
can do it on their own.
that's all zoning or just interim zoning?
All zoning.
All zoning is select,
Yep.
can be passed by the select board?
It is passed by the select board unless there's been action.
Unless they give up the right.
Well,
The
but
town could
you
vote to
know-
take it back and then
you
vote on
know-
it.
Yeah, but in the town of Roxbury, it takes, I think, 15 signatures, or 5 signatures or something, to put it before the voters, so, in effect, that's really not,
Right.
that's
Grab
nothing.
those on
And
the one
I don't know
side.
many select board members who
One
would be
family-
willing
one
to
family can
enforce
sign
zoning.
it.
Yeah. They wouldn't be a selectman the next town meeting either if they, you're right. But,
They even were still in town.
Well, any
well,
select.
I for one, as one commissioner, is certainly interested in a regional plan that is enabling, that, I prefer talking about carrots rather than sticks as far as how we move forward. But certainly we need to have a good discussion about, how do we work with towns who seem to have parochial interests. I agree with that. And try to show them that there is a regional need, and we need to all kind of, a fair share is hard to say. I'm not into that broad liberalism, but I think we need to talk about how this plan provides good leadership and good assistance, and really encourages towns to do things.
A question,
John.
before I make a comment. Being new to Vermont, in the region here, has any of the towns been experienced yet, developer, let's say, wanting to do something, especially in housing, and say, well, the town says, well, the zoning doesn't allow it, and the developer says, that's true, but your zoning doesn't really follow the outline of your regional plan. Make that one of the arguments in the developer's favor. I mean, speaking from, I hate to bring up Jersey, that's one of the things developers use. That the town zones, the regional plan here and the town zones there. And I say, well, it's not. Has that ever happened here? Yeah. And that is something you want to prevent. But once that starts to happen, unfortunately, I think the towns want to try to prevent that approach. So it's in the town's interest to make sure that zoning approximates their regional plan.
I don't know if it's happened the way you described it, but I do know that there's been times in towns where there is no zoning, where the plan had jurisdiction, and the regional plan may have had more to say about some objections of the town to some development. But I don't know about any overriding any zoning requirements. Gunnar may know, or Larry may know.
Well,
mean, for starters, I guess I'm not convinced that that is something that you want to avoid. And perhaps the
Right.
regional plan should in fact be the guidance document that the developer can go to and say, hey, you know, town, you're not doing the right thing because the regional plan says you're not.
When I say avoid, I'd rather have the town see it before they wind up in a lawsuit.
Yeah,
That's what I mean.
You might as well not have zoning if you're gonna do that. You
Well, I
might
think
just
there are
throw it all out
instances
and
where
do
the,
the original plan.
I'm not saying I agree with some of these comments, but I think there are instances where towns have zoning ordinances which make it more difficult to develop. And I think that's those parochial tendencies that someone was mentioning earlier.
But the lawsuit would be between the town zoning and the town's plan, not the regional plan. Because
Right.
the town
Because
zoning
the-
has to follow their own plan.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about, has to follow their own general plan, which may not, it would be better, it seems to me it'd be better if we could get them to follow the regional plan concept.
There's several issues there. One is how heavy-handed do we want the regional plan to be? And we philosophically, we were starting earlier some conversation about, you know, dictating things in the regional plan. I'm not convinced philosophically that's where we want to go. It's been my opinion right along that both town and the regional plans are guidance documents. They're not regulatory documents, and they shouldn't be regulatory documents. If we want to make them regulatory documents, we're dealing in a whole different realm. Yeah.
And the change of state law, though, it did kind of go into that for the town plan a little bit.
To make the, so that the zoning has to follow the town.
Right.
Right.
It does wade into those waters a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, didn't the previous environmental board chair, I can't remember her name,
Marcy
Hardy.
when
Hardy?
she was here, I thought she said that when towns hadn't updated their zoning, and they had a town plan since the zoning, that they leaned on the town, or I mean, the town plan, that they leaned on the town plan since the zoning hadn't been updated.
Actually, there's a.
And that was sort of the legal process in an Act 250 here.
Well, there's a couple of issues there. One is, there is I believe, a Vermont Supreme Court decision that discusses that issue and basically says that if the zoning ordinance is ambiguous, then you turn towards the plan for clarification.
All right, maybe that's what-
Shouldn't be allowed to happen. I think what Marcy was trying to convince us was that the town plan should be stronger documents and virtually regulatory documents, because that would make the e-board's life a lot easier.
Right, because one of the criteria is conformance with the town
And
plan.
if you have a very rigid town plan, it's very easy to see if you have conformance or not.
Right.
Because, and, you know, I think my position, I know my position has always been that town plans as guidance documents are by design vague. And you can take almost any project you want to evaluate, compare it to a town plan, and either give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, depending on which way you want it to go. Because